Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Coffee and Connection Week 174. So good to be here with all of you. So good for us to connect with each other. And it really is powerful to spend our time together. Um, there's some just not such great news coming. There were just got news of some soldiers that were killed, and it's so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. And for us to be able to connect here and we can set an intention to really create the connection that can help create more peace in the world and create more achdut. And I think that the topic of today's episode is really connected to that. It's a really powerful question that somebody sent in to me, when a woman sent in to me a little while ago, and I'm so happy to answer it because I think it's a powerful question that we can have, which really speaks to like so much about some of the thoughts we may have about ourselves. And what we'll see is that often it can even be a question that we can have about others as well. So, to just kind of paraphrase the question, um, you know, somebody asked, I hear you kind of talk about how it's so, the when we are being our authentic selves, that's what's most beautiful to our husbands. That's what is what attracts our husbands to us, and the reason this ends up coming up so much is that very often what we think is going to attract our husbands to us is if we work so hard to be what they want, what we think they want from us, what will make them happy. And the irony of the fact that that often creates this unattainable expectation that we will fit into their, image of of what an ideal wife is, an ideal mother, an ideal woman, which is really impossible, right? Because we'll never be able to, even if we try to always be what they want, that would mean always being able to read their mind of what they would want from us in every situation. And since we can't, and since, you know, we're also like, that just creates more frustration as we're trying and they come to expect us to be. And also, we then also lose the authenticity that really does create intimacy. It really does create connection. So it may sometimes seem that that's what they want from us, just like we may have pictures in our mind of what we want our husbands to be. And we think, like, oh, if only he would be this. At the same time, the more we look, the more they're like being themselves, we can be attracted to who they are, right? But I think that if you're like resisting that, that brings us to the question that the woman was asking, like, well, what if she was saying, like, I hear this idea of a man is most attracted to his wife's authentic self. But what if her authentic self is lazy or not so nice? Or, there were other messy or there were other examples of like not ideal selves, right? That doesn't sound very attractive. Like, is that what a man is attracted to? And I think this really speaks to the question of like, what is our authentic self, right? Is our authentic self all of our negative quality traits? And do our negative quality traits create the totality of who we are? Are the worst things about us, is that really what we're about? And, this reality of the fact that we may, yes, all have our challenges and we may all have our times that we may not be being our ideal self, but is that really who we are? Right? When I say like being your authentic self, am I talking about just embracing and being like, yeah, well, sometimes I'm really not such a nice person, so I'm just going to be a not nice person. Yeah, sometimes I have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, so I'm just not going to get out of bed in the morning. Yeah, sometimes it's nice to just sit on the couch and like let all the garbage pile up and the dishes and the laundry, so that's what I'm going to do. Is that really being our authentic self? And, is that what it means to embrace our authentic self? And is a woman who's not even embracing it, if she just has these like not ideal qualities, is that who she really is? And this is a really important aspect even of our own self identity. How do we identify? How do we view ourselves? How do we judge ourselves? And, it's very easy in a society that has very high expectations, and we put very high expectations on ourselves and on what we think is the way things should be, that when we see that we have struggles, when we see that we have, you know, character flaws, when we see that we don't have it all together, we can start to believe that that defines us, that that's who we are. And here's the thing, this is where we get to really understand like the struggles that we have to overcome our challenges, to overcome our negative character traits, to overcome where sometimes we're not being our ideal self. That's just part, it's actually part of what makes us not those things, right? And that having those things, again, yeah, like I said, it's something that we're meant to struggle with. It's not who we are. It may be something that our neshama is meant to overcome, but that's not the totality of who you are, even if it's a piece of who you are. And this is the powerful, amazing concept of compartmentalization, right? The ability to understand that there's no one aspect of us that defines us. We should never be able to just write down a few aspects of our personality, a few aspects of our character, a few aspects of our, um, flaws, or a few aspects of our, you know, traits, and oh, that's me, right? There's, write down a few things and like, that's who I am, right? If you read that, you just be like, oh, yeah, for sure. That's Hannah. Like, no, we are more than any of those things. There's a something that is beyond words, beyond just a list of traits, a list of personality flaws, a list of, you know, um, milas, like midos. We're beyond that because we're dynamic, right? And we're a neshama, we're a piece of God. We are, we have an inner essence that is beyond any one trait that we have. So it's very important to allow ourselves to see ourselves as more than just specific things that we struggle with. So if a woman is lazy, first of all, is she a lazy person, or does she sometimes struggle with laziness? Right? If you're going to say, well, someone's not nice, is she never nice, or does she sometimes struggle because she gets triggered, or she struggles to be able to deal with her emotions? Does she struggle to understand people? Does she need, is it that somebody is messy, or they are, when they're overwhelmed and a lot of things are going on, they're, for them, the cleanliness is not the priority, right? Or they struggle to be able to juggle that well, right? Is that who they are, or is that something that they struggle with? It's our struggle. It's not the definition of who we are. And the definition of who we are is so much more than that. At the same time, do we have those flaws? Yes. And actually, sometimes the way to create connection and intimacy is to be able to, yes, be real about those things. Yes, I struggle with that. Yes, you're right. I didn't get much done today. Yes, I was in a bad mood. Yes, like to be able to, rather than fight or feel defensive about it if our husbands see it in us, to be able to agree, to be able to recognize, like, there's this phenomenon where the things that hurt us most that people say about us are usually the reason it hurts us. The reason we're sensitive to it is because we're also bothered by it, right? Isn't that so interesting? If I'm bothered by the fact that my house is a mess, then when my husband comes home and says the house is a mess, I'm more likely to be hurt by it. Isn't that interesting? Like, if it's true, then I can agree. You're right. The house is a mess. Like it's true. I didn't get to clean it today, or I felt so tired, or yeah, I was so busy with everything else, or yeah, I want to help me clean it, or like, like we can. And if it's not true, then it's not true, right? And yet it's an interesting, right, psychological truth that we can get so bothered by it. And yet if in that moment we could say, yeah, it's true. And whether and agree to it. And not that it means, because notice that if you're hesitating to agree, then that probably means that you're making it mean something about you. But what if struggles that we have over not being our best self does not mean anything about you? It doesn't mean that you're not good enough, or you're not with it, or you're not, that it defines you. It's just something that you're struggling with, maybe today, maybe for the last 6 years, maybe for your whole life up until now. It's not you. You are so much more. And it's so powerful to allow ourselves to see ourselves as more than the things that we find difficult, the things that we struggle with. By the way, whatever you find difficult is probably an indication of a value that you have, right? Because if you didn't have a value, that value wouldn't bother you, that it's a struggle. Right. So when you say, well, what about a woman who's lazy? Is that her? I don't think that's what her husband's going to be attracted to. You're right. A husband is probably not going to be attracted to his wife's laziness, but that's not who she is. So I don't know if the question was saying, are you telling a woman to be more lazy? No, because I don't think a woman sometimes being lazy is who she is, that I'm telling her to, you know, be able to get in tune with and express. I'm talking about like the depth of her, right? How she is in terms of, how she feels and how she expresses herself when she's in a good mood. That's usually how we can see so much about ourselves. And when we're not in a great mood, to get curious with like what's bothering me, that can also help us understand our values and who we really are. That's really our essence. And if it's about, well, how will a husband be attracted to a wife who's lazy? It's like, that's not who she is. There's so much more to her than, even if she is lazy, that's just, and she's being lazy now. She's acting lazy. She may be struggling with energy. She may be struggling with feel with knowing how to manage overwhelm, right? There could be it's that's not the definition of who she is. And the same the other way. If you're struggling with an aspect of your husband that you don't like, that you're not attracted to, I invite you to use the same compartmentalization, which doesn't mean that it doesn't bother you. Let's say he's being lazy. It doesn't mean that him coming home and wanting to sit on the couch when you need his help with something, or you were hoping he was going to go do something else, or, it doesn't mean that it doesn't bother you that he comes home and sits on his phone instead of going to shear, or giving the kids a bath, or, going on a walk with you, or it doesn't mean it doesn't bother you. At the same time, I am standing for you to see that that's not the totality of who your husband is. Your husband is so much more than something he struggles with. He's so much more than even what not ideal character trait. He's so much more than something that, he has to overcome, or in a way that he's different from you. Sometimes we think someone's lazy just because they don't have as much energy as we do, or they're not as much of a go-getter as we are, or because they take more time for themselves than we think is necessary, right? And it doesn't actually have to mean that they're lazy. We may think someone's lazy, meanwhile we have no idea what they spent their day doing. It's just that they didn't do the things that we thought they should do. Right, there's so many examples of what it could mean, but it's very important to allow ourselves to compartmentalize our husbands as well. It doesn't mean that we don't aren't bothered by those things. We may be able to do some work through that also, but that doesn't mean that that's the totality of who our husbands are. And the power of being able to realize that the not so great aspects of any of us is not who we are. It doesn't define us. And that even if we don't like or love something about someone, it doesn't mean that we can't love them. It doesn't mean that we can't like them, right? So powerfully. Actually, I heard a few times over Shabbos my husband share this idea that was so this the way it was expressed was so powerful in the same way where he was talking about like what does it actually mean because Yaakov says to his brother to his children gather together and I'll tell you what will be, and this idea like we need to gather together. What does that mean for us all to gather together? Does it mean that we all have to agree? Does it mean that we all have to all be the same? Does it mean that we have to validate opinions that we don't agree with? He said what it means is that it has to be first and foremost, you are my brother. First and foremost, just like with our siblings, right? Or just like with your kids. I love you. Now I'm going to hear what you have to say. I may not agree with you, but first and foremost, I love you. The same with everybody else. It's not if I agree with you, I love you, or well, I don't like what you just said. What's wrong with you? I'll see if I can connect with you. Let me hear what you have to say, and then I'll know if you're included in my love. To really see everyone, every Jew as our family, right? It's why it's so painful. It's why it's so painful every time we get bad news like I just saw. It's because we are connected to we're connected. And please God, we should only have good news. And for these families, we feel connected to them. I feel connected to those 5 soldiers' families, even though I don't think I know any of them. That we feel connected to them. Why? Because first and foremost, you are my brother. You are my sister. You are my family, and therefore I love you. I don't know who you are. I don't know your beliefs. I don't know your religious beliefs. I don't know your religious practice. I don't know your politics. I don't know where you live, where you're from. I don't know. I don't know. First and foremost, I love you because you're my brother, because you're my sister, because we're family. And that's really all that matters. Everything else is secondary to that. Who you are, what you believe, what you practice, all of that is not doesn't have to come doesn't at all come into the question of whether or not we are one, whether or not we are connected. Because first and foremost, we are family. We are all one nation. And Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to feel that in our hearts, to love ourselves, to love our husbands, to love our children, to love our families, to be able to love all of Am Yisrael, to feel that love first and foremost. Yes, there's things that are not ideal. Yes, there are differences. Yes, there are challenges. And those are all come after the reality of the fact that I love you. With that, I bless us all that we should be able to feel that continuously. May we hear only good news, and may we all be able to continue on this path to creating connection in our homes and in all of Am Yisrael. I hope that this was helpful, and you're welcome to put whether wherever you're listening to this, to put your thoughts, what you're taking away from this in the comments below. And if you're here live, you can send it to me as well. I look forward to seeing you next week, please God. And until then, may we all be blessed to live, love, and be loved with all our hearts. Goodbye for now.